A crackdown on Uganda's opposition. Dozens killed in protests after pop star turned politician Bobi Wine is arrested once again. So how much of a threat is he to the president in next January's election? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Mohammed Jamjoom. Uganda's election campaigning is suffering a violent start. At least 37 people have died in protests triggered by the arrest of the country's most famous opposition figure, Bobi Wine. He's been charged with breaking COVID-19 rules during a campaign rally. Wine says he was tortured in detention and accuses the government of intimidation. But the government is blaming Wine's supporters for the unrest. Malcolm Webb reports.
Dozens of people have been killed in Uganda's capital, Kampala, since protests broke out on Wednesday. They began after pop star turned presidential candidate Bobi Wine was arrested. He held a campaign rally in Luwunga district, just over 100 kilometres from the capital. As usual, it attracted thousands of supporters, many more than the limit of 200 allowed under COVID-19 restrictions.
There was violent riots by activists of one of the political groups in various towns in Kampala, and the police intervened. So the deaths were as a result of confrontation with the police.
But Bobi Wine's supporters didn't see it like that. They think the government's trying to stop him sweeping to victory in presidential elections due in January. He's challenging President Yoweri Museveni, who's been in power for 34 years. After 2 days in jail, he was charged in court with breaking the COVID prevention rules and released on bail.
This was, in my opinion, meant to break our resolve. But I have news for you, Mr. Museveni, and all those that work to sustain your dictatorship. We cannot be broken. You can imprison our bodies, you can tear gas and pepper spray our bodies, but you cannot touch our souls. We are not going to stop fighting for a better Uganda.
4 other opposition presidential candidates have suspended their campaigns in protest against the actions of the security forces. The government blamed the demonstrators for rioting and attacking police officers.
Police has a right to shoot you and kill you if you reach a certain level of violence.
The elections are meant to be held just under 2 months from now. It's not clear if the campaigns will continue or how. But it is clear they've got off to a violent start. Malcolm Webb, Al Jazeera.
All right, let's take a closer look at who Bobi Wine is and his rise to prominence in Ugandan politics. Bobi Wine's real name is Robert Kyagulanyi. He's a musician turned politician and is among 11 candidates challenging President Yoweri Museveni. He won a seat in parliament as an independent by a landslide in a 2017 by-election, but has since been badly assaulted and detained many times. The following year, in 2018, he was charged with treason along with 32 others. Some claim they were tortured by soldiers while in detention. The authorities deny that. The Afrobeat star is popular with young people and has been attracting large crowds. His campaign has rattled the ruling National Resistance Movement, and this is the second time he's been arrested this month. All right, before we get into the discussion, let's speak first to Kizza Besigye in Kampala. He's a 4-time presidential candidate and patron of the opposition party FDC, the Forum for Democratic Change. Kizza, as someone who has run for president in Uganda 4 times in the past, and as someone who has been arrested numerous times, are you at all surprised that Bobi Wine was arrested again in the past few days?
Obviously not, because all the elections we have been having have been, bedeviled by the same problems. I myself was in one of the elections nominated from the maximum security prison, where I remained as Mr. Museveni campaigned for another 1 month. I got out of jail, I got a bail 1 month into the campaigns, and even during that month that I was out before the election itself, I was on trial for rape a trumped-up charge that had been placed on me. Throughout the whole campaign, I would only go out in the afternoon. In the mornings, I would be in court over the trial. And that's how all the elections have been. In Mr. Museveni, you see, does not organize elections so that really people express their will on how they will be governed or who will govern them. He organizes elections simply as a facade for international recognition that there has been some kind of a process of some kind of an electoral process. But in every election, there are the constant features: terror, using the military, and a lot of money that is pumped out into the population to rent support, the control of media, and the media that does not, act according to their will is then harassed and sometimes closed. And, the same set of things that have been applied before are exactly what are being applied now.
Are you concerned that the violence that is going on now could get worse?
Without doubt, because as the frustration within the population intensifies, the level of repression must increase. And we have seen this all through the last 35 years in which Mr. Museveni has been in office. I have contested with him 4 times, and the violence and all these other undemocratic practices that he engages has all been on the rise. The amount of money he has to spend escalates every election. The amount of force he has to use escalates every election. The control over institutions and over the media and so on escalates. So I'm not surprised that indeed violence is escalating. Now, this time we have an additional pressure of COVID, which led to a lockdown for some months. And indeed, some of the businesses have not opened. And this has led to an intensification of the social distress within the country. So we are bound to see far more resistance from the population and therefore correspondingly far more violence from the state.
Kizza, could you give our viewers a sense of what opposition parties and opposition politicians face in Uganda? I mean, how much space do opposition parties and politicians have in which to operate in Uganda?
You see, frankly, opposition parties cannot function under a military regime. The regime in Uganda is an outright military regime. And don't forget, no leader in our country has ever handed over peacefully to another leader. All leaders that we have had in Uganda since independence in 1962 have bombed their way into office. And whoever has left office has simply been bombed out of office. So the political discourse, the political power is not mediated through civic institutions. And political parties, therefore, have been a victim of military rule since independence. You cannot have a political party functioning when, for example, that political party cannot freely organize meetings, fundraise, and engage in activities that promote the party. And all those activities are very severely restricted here. There is a law that was passed some time back called the Public Order Management Act, which requires that in order to have a political meeting of 3 or more people, you require the express permission of the Inspector General of Police of Uganda. And of course, when you ask for that permission, it's not granted. So political parties really are very, very constrained. Again, political parties were not allowed under Museveni until 2004. He came into office in 1986. Political parties were only allowed to function, even in the small way they are, since only 2005. And so we don't have a culture of political party practice and of democratic practice. What goes on simply in these political parties is using the small space that is allowed to expand people's understanding, to carry out civic education, to mobilize the population so that, frankly, they can resist using all means and possibly achieve a transition to a democratic dispensation.
Kizza Besigye, thank you so much for your time today. We do appreciate it. And now let's bring in our panel, also all in Kampala. Andrew Mwenda is founder and managing director of the independent magazine covering Eastern Africa. Marion Kirabo is a politician and social movement campaigner. And Oryem Nyeko is Africa researcher for Human Rights Watch. Welcome to you all. Andrew, let me start with you. Human Rights Watch says authorities in Uganda are using COVID-19 regulations as a pretext to violate rights and clamp down on the opposition and the media. The group also says that while security forces dispersed opposition campaign rallies, they also allowed rallies for the ruling National Resistance Movement to continue. What do you say to that?
Well, I think that COVID-19 has provided the state with the perfect excuse to crack down on opposition rallies. But that does not mean that the action of the state is illegitimate. Anyone who knows, I think it's not good for politicians to conduct mass rallies in the context of this pandemic, the way President Donald Trump has been doing in the United States. So I would say that the fact that the NRM government is able to be unfair to the opposition by stopping their rallies while allowing its own supporters to conduct these rallies does not mean that the action of stopping mass rallies is a bad action. I think that's a very good, healthy decision. I wish opposition politicians in Uganda can respect the standard operating procedures and guidelines set by the Electoral Commission. You see, the opposition in Uganda argue, and to a certain degree correctly, that the government of Mr. Yoweri Museveni is characterized by gross corruption, incompetence, and a lack of the public spirit to take care of the public good. It will do anything to retain power. So the opposition, therefore, argue that this country needs change, and it needs change in the form of a set of values and principles that will underlie our next governance under them. So if you are an opposition presidential candidate like Bobi Wine, you have tens of thousands of people who are not social distancing, who are not wearing masks, coming to your rallies. You are standing on top of your car, singing and dancing for them, literally leading them to their graves. Does that show that you are responsible? Does that show that you are different from President Yoweri Museveni, whom you accuse of selfishness? In pursuit of power, you're also willing to risk the lives of hundreds of thousands of your supporters and so many other citizens to contract a very dangerous virus and die. Do you think that's fair? So I think that the human rights organizations sometimes tend to dichotomize a situation in a country and say between evil and good. The government is a devil, the opposition evil. In fact, I think we need to hold both sides of the political contest to account, that both the state and the opposition are selfish, they're inconsiderate to the interests of this country. And I wish these human rights organizations can develop such a multifaceted perspective to the problems of our country.
Oryem, is it realistic to expect that the opposition actually has an opportunity to increase its support or to gain power through these elections?
Well, I think the challenge at this point in time is the fact that the crackdowns that are happening against the opposition are so intense and have been so violent. I think if the opposition is going to be in a position to campaign, they should be allowed an equal playing platform. And that simply hasn't been the case in the past 2 weeks alone, with the arrests and the rallies that have been dispersed in such violent ways. And I think that if we were going to have free and fair elections, the the actions that the government has been taking really shouldn't be happening.
Marion, just how popular a figure is Bobi Wine, and how much has Bobi Wine's large following rattled the ruling NRM party?
Bobi Wine is very popular here in Uganda, and I would say that as much as people say that other politicians in the past and, the state machinery and propagandists have been like, it's every politician who has come out to oppose government has had crowds, and it's not a new thing. But to me, I think it's what Bobi Wine has brought in on board is something very new. I mean, it's rare for us. I don't think, at least in the time that I have been following politics, I think since 2016, when I became more politically aware, I had never seen nationwide protests before. Most of the protests would just end in Kampala. And when they end in Kampala, that's the end of it. But we saw over 2 days the whole country on strike. And, and the security forces had a difficult time weighing down the strikes. People seemed not to be afraid anymore. So we had never seen protests to this magnitude. And, people kept on, the naysayers kept on saying that, he's only popular in Kampala, in the capital city. But we have seen wherever he has gone to campaign, people follow him. There are huge, huge crowds, and people are celebrating him. And I think it's also because of the fact that many Ugandans identify with him. He doesn't have the background that most politicians in the past have gone to. Some of them have, been part of the system, and some of them have also been generals and military. He's sort of an outsider, like most of us. He comes from a very civilian-like background. I wouldn't say he's a Polish politician who's been there for a long time. He's sort of out of the politics of Kampala, I would say, and the State House. I would call him a Trump of a sort. He's of the administration, and basically many Ugandans relate to him because of his background, the fact that he grew up from the ghetto. He knows their struggles, and most of the experiences that he has gone through, he has put them in his song. So when someone listens to his songs, they really see someone who has shared their life experiences and understands what they're going through.
Andrew, let me ask you, do you expect elections are actually going to take place as scheduled in January, or is there a chance at this point that they could get delayed?
I think the elections will take place as scheduled on January 14th. I don't see anything that would stop those elections, but I need to correct certain matters of fact. In fact, when I listen to Miriam, I think she's a very young person, and she says she joined politics in 2016. In 2006, presidential candidate Kizza Besigye, who has appeared on this program a few minutes ago, was arrested, and there are countrywide protests across the whole of Uganda, and those protests lasted many more days than today, and they were even larger. In fact, the newspapers at that time, we were reporting that Kampala looked like Baghdad. At that time, the Americans had bombed the city of Baghdad in Iraq. Again, in 2011, there were protests called Walk to Work. They lasted close to a month, and they were spread across the whole country, from the north to the west to the east and central. So the country, this is not new. First of all, the use of the state to the disadvantage of the opposition has been a characteristic feature of the Museveni government throughout all the elections we have had. The death of citizens during elections is not new. In 2001, we lost 157 people during that election campaign. And there was a parliamentary investigation after the election which said that most of this violence was orchestrated by the state. So this is not new. What they would say is that today, the visibility of the protests and the scale of the protest is easier to disseminate because of the mass availability of modern communication technologies, especially social media.
Oryem.
Just imagine in 2015,
Sorry, Andrew. Let me.
I was saying that in 2015.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was saying that in 2015 we had only 4.7 million people with internet accounts. Now, by end of December 2019, Uganda had 15 million internet accounts. So there is widespread use of smartphones, widespread access to internet, which is making it much more instantaneous to disseminate information of what is happening.
Oryem, let me ask you, you heard Andrew there talk about the prevalence of violence in other elections past. With all this happening so early in this campaigning season, what does this mean from your vantage point going forward for the election?
I mean, it's a sign of bad things to come. As you rightly point out, this is just the beginning. This is 2 weeks into the campaign season, and the message is clear that the authorities are going to clamp down on opposition rallies, they're going to clamp down on protests, they're also going to restrict the space in which journalists can work. We've seen journalists being arrested for covering some of the rallies and the protests as well. So the signs are very poor and stark, but it's not surprising. And we have just a little under 2 months to go. So our expectation is that things are potentially going to get worse unless there is a very big change in the way that the government approaches these elections.
Marion, we only have a couple of minutes left. Let me just ask you, how engaged are youth in Ugandan politics, and do they feel that they can make a real difference in the direction of the country?
I think the youth this time are very engaged. I disagree with Mwenda when he says that it's just the fact that there is maybe there are more people on social media and there are more. I mean, just look at the number of young people protesting for position, you know, and it's across. It's not only in, maybe I'll say the unity platform. It's in NRM. If you look closely at our politics, we have people challenge the older generation, even in DP.
Andrew, does the public in Uganda trust the overall electoral process?
Well, if you look at opinion polls, it is 50-50. About 55% of Ugandans have faith in the electoral process and about 45%, depending on the poll, but it is 50-50. And because remember that Uganda is a country in transition. Democracy is not an event, it's a journey. And it's a journey that is not achieved at a gallop or one sprint. It is a marathon. It is traversed at a creep. And the process of democratization is even not linear. It does not follow a continuously improving curve, but it goes through zigzag. Democracy is a contested terrain. And personally, I don't think that what we see in Uganda, given its level of development and the time it has spent trying to experiment with the democracy, that the country is doing that badly. We have very many weaknesses, and they are being fixed. In fact, I was surprised earlier with the interview with Dr. Besigye, because when Dr. Besigye was in government with President Yoweri Museveni, we did not have an elected parliament. President Yoweri Museveni was not elected himself. It is better to have a president who is elected in a process where there are irregularities. Even Donald Trump is saying there were irregularities in the last election in America, than have a person who shot his way to power and rose by the gun. And therefore, Uganda, we need to look at it as a country that is in the process of democratization. It is facing many challenges, and I think it is dealing with them much better than many other countries have done, including the most mature democracies. When they were like us, they faced more challenges and perhaps handled them much more poorly than we have. So I think Ugandans should be proud of what they are achieving. The only problem is that I would implore the opposition in Uganda to sustain the momentum of democracy by insisting to their supporters to avoid rioting. When civilians go rioting, they invite the security forces to crack down, because it's the responsibility of the state to ensure order. And when you send security forces to contain order in highly populated markets and trading areas, it is difficult, even though regrettable, to avoid fatalities. And I think it's incumbent upon the opposition to demonstrate that they stand and uphold superior values and superior principles to the government that they are fighting.
All right, we've run out of time, so we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much to all our guests, Andrew Mwenda, Marion Kirabo, Oryem Nyeko, and Kizza Besigye. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Mohammed Jamjoom, and the whole team here in Doha, bye for now.